Barry, thank you for welcoming us in your beautiful studio in New York City. And thank you for your patience. I know we've been wanting to have this conversation, this fierce, as both of us call it, a fierce and robust dialogue about our views of the world, our views of accounting. I know you are very proud of that profession. I believe it's a language, the language of money, the language of wealth, the language of business. And if I had my views, every Black person would study accounting.
I could vote for that.
There you go. I knew you would. So we're starting gaining consensus. And I want to really thank you for how you and I are beginning to develop a relationship.
Yeah.
And the fact that what I respect the most about our relationship is that we are modeling the idea that debates can exist in civil society and that this is the tenet of democracy, that we can agree to disagree on some things and walk away respecting each other's views. And then what I've learned is sometimes, I've said things to you that were like triggering, and then you've gone away, thought about it, and come back. And so I just want to thank you so much for that opportunity to get to know you better.
Well, I agree with all of that, and thank you for being here. And I look forward to our conversation. And you're right, we took a little while to get this scheduled, but we are doing it in Black History Month, and so that's a good thing as well. And I think the point that you just said, though, so my own personal journey in this and dealing with and talking with Blacks, but also all minorities, there's a learning in disagreement as long as you can still have that respect. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important. Not everybody is right about everything. And, there's some things you'll say that I'll disagree with and some things that I'll change my mind on. And I've tried to invest a lot of time in that, not only with you, but with others, because it is a learning process. And I do think sort of the mission you just put out or the vision you just put out, there's so many topics in society, right, that we can make our society better if we can have compromise and debate and discussion and mutual education and even respect for others' perspectives. So hopefully we can achieve some of that today.
Oh, I know we will, because you know what, for our audience, I'll just say that we begun the conversation, and what I love about the way we're evolving our relationship is that we pick up right where we left off. It feels like we had a conversation 2 days ago and we're just picking it up. That's and it is robust and it is vibrant, and I'm really, really grateful for that. So I have had the privilege of watching in the short 2 years that we've gotten to know each other, that I dare say we're becoming friends, that your views and your perspective on the Black movement in this country is changing a little bit. And I'll tell you, I've been deeply touched to hear the investments that you're making yourself on your journey and the places and the intentionality when I've said, you ought to go look at this and come back and tell me on how you've done that. I don't know that NABA Nation or maybe many people have had sort of like the purview of watching that as up close and personal as I have. I'd love for you to tell a bit of that story, whatever you're comfortable with, particularly the pearls, right, that you think others should pick up from.
Yeah, it's kind of you to raise that. Look, I grew up in the South. I grew up in the solid South in Louisiana, right? I had an older brother and sister, 10 and 11 years older. They still have them. Integration occurred for me in the second grade. And I talk about that freely because it was my brother and sister were juniors and seniors in high school. And just remembering back to when I was 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 years old and some of those discussions, it was totally different for me. And I do view myself, I'm not perfect at it, but I try to be a very fair person and an equitable person. And what I know about Black history and what I know about the whole history of slavery and how systemically that impacts still today, I recognize that was pretty narrow. That was influenced by how I grew up, where I grew up, and what some others thought about it. Even though I personally didn't have that same environment. I told you this story. It was sort of easy for me because I was in a white elementary school, right? And integration occurs, and one little Black boy who was my age, was in there. And if you think about how hard that was for him versus me or the other 22 or 23 whites in the room, it was a totally different fact pattern. And I've thought about that a lot over my years of experience, that one element of that second grade. And, after second grade, I never saw him again. I have no idea what his name was. It's a shame, but I do know that his journey was a lot harder. So roll that forward, and obviously the notion of diversity in the profession is a very important thing to me. I think it's and we can talk about why it is if you want to go that way, but it's very important to the profession. And I have this I think, complete passion for the profession, and for the profession to be successful 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 decades from now, we have to get our arms around that. We have to be successful with the diversity of the makeup of the profession. And so learning as much as you can about that. And I know we're here talking about Black. I do think about it not only about Black, and it's different. It's different with Hispanic. It's different with Asian. And today we're talking about Black. And so a couple of things, several things I've done. I have an executive coach that keeps me online, and one of those sessions about
aren't they great? I have one too. She keeps me online.
but about 2 years ago, well, actually, it was before COVID, so time flies. I did a whole day where I had the coach bring in a Black Southerner who was born in the South, moved to the North when he's older. He's probably in his late 80s now. He ended up in the academic community, PhD. And we talked about everything from like reparations, what his life was about. He had siblings and what their lives were about, and why his parents moved them, and what was it like to be, an educator, and how he still tries to influence, even though he's retired, that process. And so it was really, really informative. And so after that, of course, COVID does hit. I wanted to do more. And I just spent a day and a half in Montgomery, and I would recommend Black and white, because our memories get foggy about what we were taught and all of those things. But that's
where we disagree. We think we just talked about this, right? We think that the memory gets foggy. I think
for most people, maybe not all.
Our perspective is that the history of these United States has been told from the white perspective.
That's fair.
Right?
So even if we remember it, it's from a perspective
that is deeply white, and that Black people have not had a chance to tell our side of the story. Yeah. And that for us, whether you call it critical race theory or whatever other words you want to put it, at the end of the day, what we're watching through, your experience at Montgomery is that Black people are demanding, and we're not wavering on our demand, that we get to tell our side of the story too, because we can't continue to pretend. Like for me, you've known this about me. I want to tell the truth, not in a way to staple anybody against the wall, but a truth that begins to heal, because until we tell the truth, we can't begin to heal this country.
Yeah, so you use the word demanded, and I get that point. And I'll just say, though, for a listener, if you don't like that word and what Guylaine just said, I would still argue go to Montgomery and hear the story. Okay? and because there's the national... I think it's called the National Institute of Equity and Justice. It's a museum. And it is truly phenomenal. And it tells the story about from the beginning of slavery and the changes of where laws were passed and why they were passed and how that migrated, how the migration was not just to the United States, but to South America and to the Caribbean and all of those types of things. And there are pieces of it that are really well done using modern technology. The most moving piece is because once slavery from out of the country was outlawed in the United States, slavery among existing slaves and their children was still legal in the United States. And a lot of that slave trade occurred in Montgomery. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And they use artificial, virtual reality, I should say, storytelling of individuals that went through that and how families were divided and how young children were impacted. It's just an incredible learning perspective.
And that's the power of storytelling, right?
It is.
It breaks you open. And, I want to tap into the word you just said, the word demand. I use the word intentionally.
Yeah, and that's fine. I'm just saying, if someone doesn't like that, doesn't mean don't go to Montgomery, right?
Right. We can agree to that.
Yeah,
I think
you
we can
still
agree
need to go to Montgomery.
Yes, because I think that's the whole point, right? People
it doesn't
get
bother me
exposed.
that you said that, because it is a part of an element of how stories are told, and there is a different story than how things are told. And whether it's 100%, I happen to think this museum is probably as close to 100% accurate as you can get, and it uses technology, and it brings you all the way through the civil rights movement and to today, really. And if you just read some of the quotes that people said during the civil rights, I mean, it's mind-boggling. I told you a story too about John F. Kennedy that I would also recommend to people. So in the Kennedy Library in Boston, there's a display that shows like an over-the-shoulder shot of John F. Kennedy in the White House listening to the Martin Luther King "I Have a Dream" speech with on a television screen, on a television screen with the shot of all those people there. And if you have a respect for John F. Kennedy, to see him to be so immersed in that speech, it was very, very powerful. We had a board meeting in Boston, and we had the dinner in the library, and I had every one of our board members, this was years ago, go in and just watch that piece, because the president is sitting there in a straight back chair and he's rocking like this, and his intensity of listening to Martin Luther King. I happen to like a lot about Martin Luther King, and
we both do.
And that was a very significant thing. So anyway, I think it's in today's world and the issues that we're dealing with, and I think people in our profession believe this. I think they want a better world. They're the people who make up our profession are good people. They are people who want to do the right thing, and they're objective, because that's a core competency of our profession, objectivity. And so the more we can re-immerse ourselves into the storytelling from a different perspective, et cetera, I think that's powerful. I really do think that's powerful. And I think, I haven't done this yet, but I travel a lot globally, and in an Africa trip, I'm going to Ghana, which is where a lot of the ships came. I just want to see that.
And I want to take you also to Senegal on the island of Gorée, so maybe we'll do that one together, right?
Yeah.
And that'll be fun.
Yeah, and so I just want to see that history, and I don't want someone's perspective of it. I want to experience it.
And that's awesome. And what you're also talking about, Barry, that ties again to the demand word, is the power of our voice, right? I mean, I've for those people who don't know, listening to this, I was born and raised in Haiti.
We talked a lot about
a failed state. I can say that, right? Yeah. We've got a lot to do, but that also emerges of all the history of Haiti, that we had to pay a penalty after our independence to France, that the shrewdness of having white Southerners to enforce the embargo, because white Southerners were so afraid of their slaves getting ideas, right? And so the brutality of it all, this doesn't happen by accident. That's why you and I are both lovers of history, because it gives us a perspective of how things begin to evolve, right? And so the power of that voice. So I've been in these United States for 35 years now. I'm American. I love this country. But to have seen what you're talking about, the Smithsonian standing up a museum to the Black history.
That you can't even get in, it's so popular.
Exactly. Go figure. And then what, Brian Stevenson is doing with the Equal Justice Initiative.
It's well done.
I can attest. All of it, right? It's a perspective that people can choose to immerse themselves. Our jobs, I think, as leaders, and particularly those of us who are at the sort of like the pinnacle of CEOs, that's how we get to change people's perspective, is by bringing them along, because until we do that, right, people think it's nice, because where you and I are going to have good debate now is when we talk about good people. The people who committed atrocities against my people were good people, right? That's
maybe.
Well, no, but they were good people. They were family people that went to church, right? That took care of their family, that provided for their families, right? And we continue so I will tell you, for me, when people talk about good people, I'm like, from the perspective of who? Right? From the perspective of who? But you know what? One of the big conversation that we need to have in this country, I think, is the difference between inclusion and assimilation. And I think this profession, as you look at accounting as a profession, I look at it as a language. I think that the state in which it finds itself, honestly, is because most of the time it is an assimilated process, not an inclusive process.
Inclusion, I think we
can agree on that.
Yeah, I get your point on, whose definition of good people, but I think most humans, whatever their color of skin, they want to do well. They want to do the right thing. I don't think people are born to create atrocities. We all know there are people in the world who create atrocities.
No, we agree.
Right? And so when I say that, I think people who become more aware, more educated, and maybe relive history, the learnings of history that they've had, I think people see that. I also think, just putting in the economic terms, and I agree with you on inclusion, because frankly, the percentage of Blacks in our profession would be totally different if we had the same retention rates over the last 25 years with Blacks as we do with whites. Mm-hmm. The data shows that. It would probably approximate the population of the Black population in the United States overall inside the profession. We have a big gap on that. And it's not so much that over 25 years that people didn't come through. We want more in the pipeline, but it's that we didn't retain. And we didn't retain in many ways, and we learn today in society, we learn a lot more about inclusion and the investment that's necessary in inclusion and the commitment to inclusion that's important. But if that would have occurred for the last 25 years, we'd probably have a different fact pattern that we're dealing with today. And added to that, because we're talking about entrepreneurial capital, that's what our profession serves, right? Whether you work in a company, whether you do an audit of a company where there's investment capital, whether you work in a bank, we are a profession that serves entrepreneurial capital. And the reality is,
it does the minding our business.
Yes, exactly. But if you think about it from investment or entrepreneurial capital, the profession serves that. And we talk about the public interest. Well, the reality is, in this country, the ownership of entrepreneurial capital, probably many decades or even a couple of centuries too late, is becoming much more diverse. And so it's important for the profession to reflect that diversity. And so there's a whole lot of reasons why this topic is important, but if you just wear the business hat is that the profession has to serve all entrepreneurial capital, and that is a diverse thing today, and it's going to be more diverse 2 years and 5 years and 15 years from now, and therefore the profession needs to reflect that so that it can better serve that entrepreneurial capital.
And Barry, I will offer you this perspective. I don't think I've had a chance to tell you this in private, so I get to tell you that in public. My perspective on the relationship that you and I are both intentional on crafting on our own terms has gotten deeper because of the learning that you have and the way you don't get triggered by the perspectives that I bring on the table anymore in just 2 years. That's why that education matters. That's why
perspective is important.
Right. But it's important, well, that education first, because I think education gives perspective, right? Yeah, you sort of like heard some things and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to go find out for myself. Right. And the more you found out, the more you have perspective, and the way in which you start to engage with people, it might be subconscious, quite frankly, right? And that's why we start to talk about unconscious biases, but it's shifting, right? So I'm going to continue the conversation because I think this is really good. I wrote a piece to kick off Black History Month because our spirit as Black people, for me as a Black woman, a mother, a wife, a sister of a Black man, my spirit will never stop to be fierce, but my heart was absolutely broken by what we witnessed in Memphis, Tyre Nichols. And I'll tell you what I heard was your voice when you said, "How does that happen?"
Oh, totally.
How does that happen?
How does that happen?
How does that happen? I will never forget when you said that to me on the phone. How does that happen? How does that happen? I'd love to hear your perspective with all sort of like the broken openness that you're experiencing on what your view of all this thing is.
Well, what was the underlying motivations of the way those policemen reacted? I have trouble, me personally, having trouble watching that and saying that was just sort of a reaction in that moment. It can't possibly be to me, right? And so there's something else there that I don't think we really know. And
we know what it is. Black men are viewed as a threat. So the minute you see a black man in a place where you don't think they should be,
the whistling Vivaldi comes through right here.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we need to be a better society than have that happen. I mean, that is. And
for me, I'm like, I heard you say, "How does that happen?" And then I added and say, "How does that happen again?"
Yeah, well, again, it's fair. I can tell you, I said to my wife when it first happened, I said, "Did you see this Memphis thing?" And it is exactly what I said. Is how does that happen? You know what? That we can't have that. And then you could add, you said again, and I would say, after all other things we've been through, you know? And so why can't we make improvements, you know, in that type of situation? And I'm at a loss. I mean, I don't have a solution for that, but we have to find a solution collectively for that.
I appreciate that. So now we're going to get the real thing. People are going to get to see us really spar. Because I think this is one that is a really touchy subject for you and one that's a really touchy subject for me, which is the representation of Blacks in the CPA category. So I did some research. Black in technology roles has a 7% representation, 3.5x time what CPAs are. Doctors, 4.5%. And then lawyers is like 5.5, 5.7, or something like that. At CPAs, we're still stuck at below 2%. Why?
Yeah, we could argue that, but it's not enough wherever the number is.
I would love to hear your perspective about. Well, it's really not. Actually, you know what? Some of our data seems to indicate it's below 2%.
Yeah, so it's about 7% have entered the profession from accounting graduates. Certainly the last data is about 7% entering. And what I said before, you can go back 25 years and whatever that percentage number is, let's say it's 2% just for the sake of argument, coming into the profession would have been greater than 2%. So you can point to, I mean, basically it's around 6 or 7% in the last decade, right? So you can point to, I think you can immediately get to this inclusion point that you say, and you can say it's retention, but retention works in the inclusion part. And I think an unconscious bias comes into it as well, I believe. Because, so let me say it this way. So I work really hard to try to get the profession to change in this process, as well as a lot of other people do, right? But I don't know really what it's like to be a Black man or a Black woman, right? I don't really know.
You don't want that.
No, but I mean, I can't really know. I can try to close the gap, but I can't get all, it's impossible, right? Because I'm not. So I didn't live through those types of situations. And when we talk about inclusion, and I've talked to many, many practitioners, you know, everybody believes they're inclusive. There's very few people who would say, yeah, I'm not inclusive, right? At least they wouldn't say that publicly.
They wouldn't say that to you about that.
Right. But the reality is inclusiveness is defined, if you just wanted to say, am I being inclusive to you? It's defined by you, not by me. And so.
But you know what, Barry, hold on. I feel like when I'm with you in a conversation,
I'm
that
not
I
using
belong.
me and you.
Right, but you know what, but that's the piece. That's the evolution of the flow of our conversation. There were things at the beginning when we met that you felt probably I was like a bit out there. But then as you started to learn and get to know me, and you didn't try to get to know me from your perspective.
Right.
We sat down and had a meal, and you started to understand sort of like why what are the things that shaped me the way I did. So when we have conversation, we're bridging it more and more. That's what inclusion is.
Absolutely. But it also, how well we do is really more your perspective than my perspective, right? Because I can think we're achieving that, but if you don't, we aren't. And so I think when you think about inside the profession, if you think about how the profession works, and I do think about this. So, if you go out on an audit, I mean, sort of doing an audit is sort of a rite of passage for a good chunk of our profession, right? Let's just say a team of 10 people on an audit, or a team of 5 people on an audit, and you have one Black person on it. You might say, yeah, but they get invited to dinner, or they, at breakfast and all. But is that really creating the inclusiveness of a relationship building? And I think that's what inclusion is all about. It's understanding, asking the question, how do you feel about this? What do you feel about this? Whatever phraseology is important. And so I think retention is really about, it's clearly an unconscious bias, but it's about this inclusiveness issue that we probably haven't done really well. Now, does that mean the medical profession's done it well? Probably not.
No, that gauging by the numbers.
Yeah,
none of it is good.
None of it is good.
Right, but it's just that the numbers indicate a much higher representation than the CPA.
So why is it less in the CPA? Now, there's some different fact patterns that are different than medical and law. And some of them contribute. I'm not trying to say that the total difference, but they are factual patterns here. So the CPA profession is actually a bit different than, I will just use, you use medicine and law. So the profession, this profession today for minorities, not just Black, but also Hispanic and Asian, tends to be still today a first generation professional component for that person who tries to come in. For instance, I was a first generation professional in my family coming into the CPA profession. The CPA profession is sort of known for that. The difference is, as a white person, that was occurring in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and now it's occurring in the 2000s and 2010s for a lot of Black. And first generation issues are different. In medicine and law, there's a lot of second generation. There's a lot of kids of doctors. It's a pretty common situation. We haven't matured to that with the role models and the people who have been in the profession who are Black for a few decades. There's not enough numbers there to get that sort of multiplier effect. That's just a math function. But it is, in fact, true that we have not actually gotten to that degree of maturity that, say, some other professions have. I do think also that there is less awareness in the influence points in the Black community about our profession than there is about law and medicine. And so clearly medicine, every family deals with medical doctors, no matter where you are in the socioeconomic. We can talk about equity or lack of equity in the healthcare system, but we all deal with doctors in some fashion. So there's a knowledge base on it. There is a much greater presence of the legal profession, including Blacks in the legal profession, on television and in politics and in leadership positions that you don't see as much in our profession. And so there's a lack of awareness. There's been research, and you may come up with a different notion. But two really important role models in a young Black person's life is a religious leader and generally a maternal person, right? A grandmother, a mother, or whatever. Now, maybe there's some stereotype to that, but there's a lot to that as well. And so do those people know our profession? And the reality is their sort of knowledge of our profession is a lot smaller. And so one of the things that's happening right now is there's a major effort at pre-college, the high school level. It's funded by the firms. It's a $50 million program over 2 years. It's social media based to try to change that perception in junior high and high school Blacks about the opportunities in the profession and about how they can relate to the profession and how that can be a great career for them. And it can be a great career. And so it's a 2-year program. It's a major emphasis of trying to get to that element where the knowledge in inner city schools, predominantly minority schools, et cetera, isn't really there to the same degree. And so if you take the inclusion part, which we have to educate more on, we have to do a better job inside firms. And I do think firm leaders are investing in trying to do that better. And then, this awareness thing, I think hopefully if we're doing a video like this in 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, we start to see some greater fruits from that.
So I'm a big fan of Accounting Plus. NABA signed up to be on the platform with Accounting Plus, and I don't disagree with you that the momentum, right, created by the CAQ around Accounting Plus would carry, but I think it's going to be years. In what you're talking about also, Barry.
All things are years in this area.
And we don't disagree. I think, though, in the profession, though, part of the data that we've been looking at NABA is that this pyramidal ways in which firms are built means that less than 1% of partners, if you took all, your major firms, all the top 100, right? The top 100, the top 200, less than 1% of those firms have Black partners. And of the 1% are equity partners, right? And so when you're talking about sort of like, why should folks want to stay? We can start to talk about barriers of entry, right? Because the reality of it is I'm working hard. I'm not making as much as I would go if I did something else. And then the path to prosperity, and dare I say wealth, because, NABA wants to be part of closing the Black wealth in this country, is that, the wealth starts to really be built at the partnership level.
True. So let's talk structure and let's talk time. Okay. The reality, so let's just say you are a Black graduate at the University of Texas or the University of Illinois or whatever, and you go into a public accounting firm. The reality is that those firms lose, back to the retention point, those firms lose those individuals because there's high demand, which is not necessarily bad, but there's high demand in the corporate sector, in the government sector, et cetera. And it is a quicker path. The business model of the profession is a partnership model. It's totally structured differently than a law firm. So a law firm is going to look more like a cylinder, and a CPA firm is going to look more like today, like a pyramid. And so will a finance function in a company today look more like a pyramid. And we speak a lot about it in a lot of our future aspects. Is that, and it's already changing, is that the future shape of a CPA firm and a finance function is actually a fat middle organization. So if you take that pyramid and you think about the two corners, there's an element of that corner that is technology impacted, right? Just because of the advancement of technology. So that's one corner. And there's an element of the other corner that is done all over the world in an offshoring, nearshoring type of environment. So if you just take the pyramid and you whack off two corners, you got a narrower base. Now the reality is it isn't pointy and things of that nature. The reality is I like to use if you think about a hot air balloon and you turn it upside down, right? So a hot air balloon, when it's flying, is a rounded top and it's got the little nozzle at the bottom which is the top of that pyramid or top of that structure. You turn that upside down. That's really the structure of finance and firms in the future. Now, when you make that shift, there's a business model shift, right? There's a business model shift, there's a leverage shift that occurs that has been for 50, 60, 70 years the base model of that pyramid. So the history of the pyramid shape in a CPA firm.
Here we go again with history, right?
Well,
it's
you
powerful.
like history. You like
I love history.
The history of the pyramid shape in a CPA firm compared to a law firm really came about, I think it was in the 1940s, when the manufacturing model was adopted into the profession. But it really wasn't a profession then. It really was more of a trade then. The accountancy profession, that we will use that term today, in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, with the exception of a little narrow slice of auditing on the Wall Street, was really more of a trade. And if you went into a firm, let's say a medium-sized firm of the day, which would have been really small then, it was a huge room full of people just grunting out work, right? Yep. Okay, and so that clearly is changing. And what we believe actually will happen is that you will see much greater movement from the corporate world back into public practice in that middle, some of them as direct admit partners as well. So there's a whole new set of opportunities and challenges from that perspective. So it's an opportunity for people who may have been in a firm, Blacks, and then they went to corporate, to come back in a much different environment. So I don't think it's going to be the same sort of period of time of migration. I think there's business model changes that are really occurring in that space that I think will be good, that will help us along that way. Also, I think that the awareness that has occurred in the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years in these firms about the diversity issue, the thing that I just talked about with the business issue, I think that's going to move things to a quicker degree than the traditional 10, 15-year migration that has occurred. And that's going to apply to whites and Blacks and all other, I think those things will start to change. Unfortunately, if you're going to be a partner in a medical practice or a partner in a law firm or a partner in a CPA firm, there is a time element that gets spent in that process. So it needs to be a reasonable time element. There needs to be good compensation on the starting salary level and to be competitive in the marketplace, which is one of the things the profession's wrestling with right now. But it's not like a very short time frame, however the thing evolves to.
I love that. I love listening to you talk about this because you're right. And then I think that the appetite for labor is going to change too.
Very much so.
Right? Because at the end of the day, I've said this, I'm not a minority. I'm a member of the global majority because, what, as you look at, like we both love history. We both love to see how data progresses, right? There's going to be more people of color on this planet. I mean, somebody a good friend of mine, Jim Johnson at UC Chapel Hill, talks about.
I know him well.
There you go.
The Browning of America.
The Browning and the graying of America.
The Browning and the graying
of America.
That's
right. So, Jim, if you're listening, at least you know that you've got fans in the room too.
We just had him speak, so to tie into this change management point. We just had him speak to all of the CEOs and CEOs of the 100 largest firms in January.
That's awesome. I love this conversation. And the reason I really like the technology model, which is at 7%, are you familiar with the CompTIA? So it has, and I'll share it with you, and anybody who wants to see it can connect with us and we'll send it to them, is that there's a whole pathway that CompTIA, has designed that allows somebody to enter the technology field out of high school with an A+ certification. And it has a variety of ways that combines skills element with education to allow them to progress without this dependency on higher education. And we believe at NABA that's one of the highest reasons why we're saying this. You and I have had this debate in private, so we can talk about it a little bit.
So two really important parts. Number one, the CPA is changing to include technology. It's called CPA Evolution. It's effective January 1, 2024, and it's a core plus one model. One of those models is technology, so that addresses that point. But also, technology is not a government-regulated profession. And there is a lot more flexibility. And we're doing some things, for instance, on the management accounting side, which is not in the government-regulated space, that you are well aware of because we've done some things partnering in that space with apprenticeship programs and grants and things of that nature. And we're going to continue to do that. But then there's another level that isn't sort of pre-college, but what is being rolled out as a mechanism for people to get to the education requirements of CPA, but in a different way. In fact, it's going to be the major part of our regional council meeting discussions in March, and it's going to be ready for piloting and then build starting in August. And what that concept is to say you get hired at the back. You can get hired at the baccalaureate. You can go to work for a firm, getting paid the normal wage, et cetera. And the firm commits to the individual that as part of their work portfolio, there is an education process that is overseen through the academic community. So it still has academic rigor. So they're working and being paid, and and through the model that we're doing, we're driving down the cost of that additional education to basically the average of a community college hourly rate. And so the person will have the support of the firm working, gainfully employed, if you want to think about it that way, at a normal salary and getting the last parts of their education with the academic rigor that comes to that. But there's a major difference between a government professional regulation, which would be like law and medicine and CPA, since we use those, versus technology. So I accept your point, but it is a major, technology is not a regulated profession.
So we agree, and I think that, let's put it out there, there's a lot of conversation about deregulation. I'm a member of the American Enterprise Institute, and there's a lot talking about deregulation.
Right. I mean, do you want deregulated doctors?
No, I don't want deregulated CPAs either.
Okay.
No, I just want to make sure we're clear. This is why I love what PwC has done with calling this whole audit trust. Right, we gotta give the market trust that they can. Otherwise, we don't have a democracy.
CPAs are trusted professionals.
Right,
that's a brand that we use.
Absolutely, we can agree that this country and the world is evolving to an idea of skills. This is why the gap between higher ed and industry exists. Right, the idea that it's evolving more and more to a skill-based model, and when we're looking at Gen Zs, they're more, arcing towards like gig economy. So we've got to adapt to that, right? Yeah. And for us, here's the reality. Those of us who hold the minority perspective are not necessarily like part of those conversations.
The reality is that one of the elements of this profession, you talk about barriers. One of the elements that we've brought down as a barrier in this profession is the ability of mobility throughout all 50 states. Technically 49, Hawaii doesn't have it. But the element is that as a CPA, you can move among the states and go provide services or do activities which you can as a doctor, you can as a lawyer, you can as an architect or an engineer. And that is built on a model of substantial equivalency between each of those states. Which
the exam provides.
The exam and the regulatory process now provides.
Yes.
But it's not just exam. It's 3 E's: education, exam, and experience.
Right.
Okay? And so the element is, I talked about the 1940s, this profession was a trade. It has been elevated to a profession. You want to talk about wealth creation? Part of being a profession, people can be successful and can change the path of their families, etc., by being a profession. The professions are limited in this country, and the CPA is one. So we have to find solutions, creative solutions, to get to the requirements, which we are doing because, frankly, human capital is changing, as you just said. We are, in fact, doing that. Just because there is a certification model of testing at a high school in the technology world doesn't mean that that's right for the CPA profession. But the CPA profession continues to evolve. So we were the first profession in this country with a uniform CPA, a uniform exam. The first. It's over 100 years old. There isn't anything over 100 years old in this country that's universal. But the CPA exam is. It's well over 100 years old. We created a mobility motion so that people could have greater opportunities and not be have to go through hoops to go from state A to state B. We're the only profession that has done that effectively. And now, yes, we have an education process which is lower than medicine and law and engineering, etc. It's lower than that. But it's greater than just a baccalaureate degree. And we're creating a flexibility approach to it that you can tackle it in a much different way today, where the firms are going to be able to pay people. They're going to be able to have the academic support. They might work, let's just say they're working 40 hours. They may spend 8 hours in continuing their education process while they're working to get to the additional credits. So we would argue we're actually putting the flexibility into it while maintaining the high standards of the profession and while keeping the profession with the advantages it has that other professions haven't even been able to address yet.
Barry, I hear all of that, and respectfully, I would say that all the things that you talk about have not served my people well. Because all the processes of 100 years exam and so on, at the end of the day, this is where my people have the least representation, right? And so I want to have this, I want us to, we can agree to disagree, we're not going to solve this today, but that the idea and the ideal should be that when I talk about the pathway is that we ought to be able to look at other ways that people can prove the learning and the education and the experience. I understand, but you know what? You're depending on the firms to be able to do that. And the reality is the smaller the firm,
this
the more
is
difficult.
Absolutely scalable. It's being built to be scalable to small firms. That's a really important thing, small firms, from that standpoint. It is intended to be, and it's going to continue to evolve as with trial and error, as you would expect, but it is going to be scalable to all size firms. It's not just a big firm issue because, frankly, while there's a great career in the big firms, for a white or a minority or a black, not necessarily right for everybody, right? And particularly if you look at people who might come out of, not the top 10 universities or whatever, their career path is probably going to be in a smaller firm or a different size firm. And absolutely one of the imperatives, one of the principles in the design of what I just described to you is that it's scalable for the small firm model.
I feel heard that at the end of the day, we ought to be able to give people, right, their experience, their time on the job, the things that they've done ought to count for something towards the extra 30 credit hours. Because
that's what we're doing.
Right. I hear
that's what we're doing.
No, I think this is what you're attempting to do because it hasn't been done yet.
Okay.
Right? We'll see how much the market responds and the reality.
It will respond.
Right? Well, we will see because the reality also is we just talked about the pyramidal effect, the fat middle as you call it. We know that you've got friends in the profession, and I'm not an accountant, but I represent a lot of people in that profession, that, this is about to be grueling time for a lot of people. This is about buckling down. And so if I'm graduating college in December or January, like how much time am I really going to be able to devote to this?
No, it is in the design that is a set aside for it. The firms would have to agree to that set aside for those employees.
And that fat middle, I've not seen it. Listen.
Oh no, some firms are definitely moving to that.
Okay.
Not every firm. It's not going to happen overnight, but it is moving to that.
I agree. Listen, here's what I hear is that there is a bought-in that the extra 30 credit hours is important. The reality, though, is that, we know with the dryness of the pipeline, right, in addition to only 7% of people are entering compared to other professions, plus the retention issues, right, at the end of the day, I would just want to continue this conversation about leaning in to say, what are other things, other model? And I would love to see NABA and Alpha and Ascend at the table when those pilots are being put together, because part of this perspective that we bring to the table is that we know our communities, we know they talk to us,
Absolutely,
we know what the things are, and so it's really hard.
And we did bring it to the NCDI before it was finalized for feedback, and there were modifications made to it, which is the National Commission on Diversity and
Inclusion. Which I sit on.
Which you're there, and all the other groups are there. And so we did absolutely do that. And oh, by the way, you know this very well, our chair-elect, who is a very successful Black man in this profession.
Go Corey Ramsey, and we're going to get to celebrate him together. Thank you for carving time out for that.
And is in the room on all of these discussions.
Yes.
And Kimberly Ellison Taylor.
Right.
And not a Black man, but Anoop Mehta, who is Asian, born in India, first non-American born chairman of the AICPA. So 3 out of 7 years. Those individuals have all been in on these types of discussions. Kimberly's no longer on the board, so Anoop and a Corey Moore. So those elements, totally right. And by the way, no program that you put forward to make change is going to be absolutely correct. Everything is an evolution. So yes, obviously we're going to see how it does and what can be tweaked and what can be done better. That you should expect that. I expect that.
Let's just go now about legacy. That's something that, you hear me talk about a lot, leaving the place better than we found it. You've been in this role for 28 years, I think? Wow.
Long time.
It's a long time. It's a long time. But you know what I get a sense of is that you're still going and you with no intention of slowing down anytime soon.
We all slow down.
Not from your traveling schedule. I don't have a sense that you're about to slow down anytime soon. What do you want your legacy to be when you finally hang up the hat?
Yeah, it's not a single point. I think...
we just agreed that there's no single point.
No, but I mean, some people could say there's... I think I think our profession has changed a lot in those 28 years. And I think it needs to be a profession that lives and is very agile and changes with the times. People like to stereotype the profession that talks about, accountants are green eye shade and they don't change. That's just not true. It's not true. And we've sort of freed that up. We don't, as the AICPA, we can't make firms do anything. Our world is through expressing opportunity, sort of maybe giving sort of permission, if you will, marketplace permission to do certain things, motivation and encouragement. And I think we've done that really, really well. I think if you look at, for instance, back to, even the human capital element, CAS services, which is client advisory services, which are it's a major part of the firm. It's actually the number one growing part.
Revenue. I tell everybody, if you want to make money in accounting, you go to CAS.
And by the way, huge opportunity for people who can do that from high school or do that with 2 years of college or whatever. So huge opportunity, and they're being led by people on partner tracks today in firms. That's just one example. We have a major project to re-engineer the audit. The audit has to change with technology and things of that nature. It's called Dynamic Audit Solution. It's a huge project. It's the firms have come, many firms have put up, huge amounts of money to do it. Basically saying, if an audit didn't exist today, no one would know now how we created it, right? And, CPA evolution is one. I could go down, I put them all in the notion of innovation and transformation. And I think we've done a significant element of that. I think the profession is a much better career path profession than it was before, and that I think is a legacy part. I think the diversity of the profession is a legacy part, because if you come back to my marketplace analysis of entrepreneurial capital, to be perfectly blunt and honest, entrepreneurial capital wasn't as diverse 28 years ago in the marketplace as it is today. The country has changed, the world, but the country has changed in that process. And, getting the profession to be more reflective of that, I think is very important, because that will determine success in the future as well. So things like that is what I think about. Unfortunately, maybe fortunately, unfortunately, I don't think it's for me to talk about that legacy part. I have a long history. I've made mistakes. I've learned from mistakes.
Who hasn't made mistakes?
But we've done a lot right. And the profession is in a much different place. It's a different place economically. It's a different place trust and reputationally. It's a different place from an opportunity perspective. And I think this organization and this profession actually ought to be very proud of that, because collectively, it's the members of the profession that have done things in evolution to position the profession differently. And then, of course, there is a big public interest and ethical part. We live in a world that's devoid of trust. You used the word trust. We don't trust many things, we really don't. Not just in the United States, but we don't. What do we trust? I mean, it's a short list if there's anything, right? We don't trust the media, and we don't trust government leaders. We don't trust business leaders in a lot of ways. We don't trust religious leaders today in a lot of ways. You just go down that list. The profession is highly trusted. That's a huge value proposition, not only to the profession but to society, that there's a place that there is that type of trust. And I also think the role of the U.S. profession on a global basis is critically important, because business, the movement of people, on a global, there's a melting pot of the world that's occurring. We talked about Dr. Johnson and the browning and graying of America, but there's a melting pot in the world. And so how our profession has really a leadership position on a global basis. ESG is an example where it's going to be slower in the United States, but we have a great leadership position on a global basis. And so it's things like that I think about, but others will be able to spend a lot of time when I do retire that say, you did this well, or you didn't do this well, or you missed this, or whatever. And so that's the inevitables.
What I hear, though, that matters to you is that innovation, transformation, ethics, and trust. I hear that those things are really important to you. So what do you do when you're not globetrotting talking about this profession?
I think about that a little bit. I think there's probably some boards I want to be on. I think there are some innovative things that are happening, some in the profession and some in the connectivity of the world. I think we're society moving forward is much different. I mean, it is obviously technology is a huge element of that, and what we know and how we interact with people. I mean, just look at we're talking about diversity here. You know, look at the people today who define themselves as from multi-ethnic backgrounds, right? If we would have done this 10, 15 years ago, I would not have even said that. You probably wouldn't have even brought it up. It would have been a very small part of society. It's a growing part of society. We become a world, you know. Yes, we're going to have for a long time the defensiveness of people from a country perspective. And certainly we have that attitude in the U.S. But so there's things like that that I think that I think are important. And ESG is important to me. Look, and people say, wow, you know, ESG, some people will say, oh, it's just political and all that stuff. You know what, the honest answer is I don't know if it's just political. And I don't know if every idea out there, in fact, I doubt every idea out there is positive to the environment. But what I do know is that if we have fair and consistent measurement and reliability on that measurement to tell the story of whatever that idea is, we're going to make better decisions as a society. That transparency, which we can bring to the table as a profession, that transparency will frame that discussion, and some of it will fall off the table because it'll be proven whimsical, and some of it will be proven to be absolutely correct. And if you think about our profession, if you think about it as a young person in our profession, how powerful is that? That's super powerful.
I'd like you to do a I statement for me, so I'm going to go first.
I hate I statements.
I know you do, but you
hate
have
them.
to. We're going to close that up on an I statement. When you talk about trust, the one that worries me the most is the eroding trust in institution. Mm-hmm. I'm a self-defined institutionalist. I don't even know if that's a real word, but I don't think we make progress without institutions, which is why we look at NABA as an institution. Right? And the civil rights movement where we started happened because of an institution that is the Black churches, right? That created sort of like gave Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the others a pulpit. So I worry about the eroding trust in institutions and the place of Black institutions in sort of the landscape. I have been fascinated by the ESG and the conversation around it is not really three sets of letters combined together. E is a thing. S
is a thing, S is a thing,
and G is a thing.
Right.
And I wish in this country would begin to talk about D. No, we don't talk about DEI.
But well, that's in the S. It's in the S.
Right, but that when we talk in general, we talk about DEI, that we would then decouple that D is a thing, E is a thing, and I is a thing. They're not all three letters combined together in the way that we do it now.
I agree with that.
And so, your turn.
I wish we could reverse some of the power of the extremes on both sides that are given primarily through social media today. I think we're a country who has made a lot of mistakes, including slavery is probably way up there on the list. But we've solved problems through compromise, and our system of government is based on that compromise. And we don't have a system that compromises today. And that's not good for our country. It's not good for the world, because we lead a lot in the world. And I wish we could find a way to build compromise back into the system, giving and taking. The right answer is generally not the extremes. And I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel on that. So I wish I could at least see the light at the end of the tunnel on that.
Well, you're doing your part from where you are.
And you are too.
Well, that's why I enjoyed this conversation so much. Thank you for fierce debate. Thank you for aligning where we could and should. And thank you for agreeing to disagreeing and still agreeing that we're going to continue to sharpen the saw. As my grandmother used to say, from the
Maybe it doesn't have to be a saw. Maybe we can get a better analogy.
Okay, we'll find something else. But you know what? What my grandmother used to say is that from the conundrum of ideas, genius usually emerges. And so thank you again for this time. And I hope people will get to know you a little bit better.
And thank you for your passion for our profession. As you said, you're not part of the profession. So I appreciate the relationship. We'll continue to build it. It'll get better. And hopefully people can see that we disagreed. You know, one of the things throughout this process, and you know Kimberly very well, but Kimberly and I go after each other, but we advance, and I hope to have that relationship going
that's
forward.
Exactly
I think we have a great foundation for that.
So. There's no other way. Otherwise, I know you wouldn't dedicate. What people don't know is that we're now about to go have dinner with a group of Black leaders. And so I know you like to say I'm the minority now, and I love putting you in a minority position. And you would dedicate the whole half of a day to doing this, Barry. And I know it, and I'm grateful for it. And I know together we'll make progress.
Thank you, Guylaine. Good talking to you.
Good talking to you.